Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Your Neck of the Woods. We have a very interesting episode coming today because after our conversation with Ward 11 candidate Courtney Brannigan, we were going to do a episode on the event center, the Green Line, and the Guidebook. And tonight was going to be the episode on the Guidebook. However, recent events in the Planning and Urban Development Committee have made that conversation a lot shorter in some ways, because the Guidebook for Great Communities, now renamed the Guide for Local Area Planning, has been taken by administration and turned into a purely best practices guiding document with no bylaw or prescriptive measures attached to it. And so there's going to be no further debate, discussion, or measures, and neighborhoods that need revitalization will use the Guide for Local Area Planning as a more of an actual guideline. Jason, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, absolutely. What a development. Hey, I mean, we've had this conversation a couple of times, just you and I, kind of talking about the guidebook and how it came from a prescriptive kind of outlook, at least it seemed like. And so I just want to say, I guess my first question to you, Jacob, is knowing your position, which was that this guidebook was too prescriptive and was steeped in legality to the point where it wasn't really a guide, it was a law almost, or a legislation. And so with this challenge, I know that there had been some murmurs, for lack of a better term, that have kind of suggested that this was a easy way to get the guidebook into being an open or a living body of work through the city of Calgary without any critical analyses or without any real criticism, because it's no longer so prescriptive and steeped in bylaw and legislation. What do you think? Do you feel that way?
I see that argument, and ultimately the devil is in the details. However, how this was presented at the pod committee and with no bylaw being attached to it, to me this actually means the first time the guidebook or the guide for local area planning actually lives up to its name. It should be implemented more as a guide within the process, as opposed to these are the choices you're allowed to make, and there should be more flexibility in the way neighborhoods move forward.
Well, absolutely. And again, I think that in that prescriptive fashion that it was in, and just like to your comment saying that it was the devils are in the devil's in the details. It very much I found, and I think you agreed, is that by creating such a prescriptive model, it's hard to create a vibrant, unique city, because it seems as though you'd have very few, or communities would have very few, prescriptive choices to make, versus now they can kind of look at the planning that the city has analyzed and put forward and said, listen, based on how we see this city going forward, these are the recommendations. If you disagree, well, we won't penalize you for it. Does that make sense?
Exactly, and I gotta give it to Mayor Nenshi lots of credit here, because he's the one that came up with this compromise and sort of admitted that maybe council and the city created controversy where there didn't need to be controversy. Where I'm kind of struggling now is the people on council that were quite angry about the guidebook are now touting it as this secret cloak and dagger plan to implement it anyway, and it kind of undercuts them because it sounds like they just lost something they were gonna campaign on and now don't know what to do.
Well, and that's that is a real possibility for sure. I mean, it's hard to if the weapons are down, it's hard to still look at someone and go, you're coming after me with this weapon, for lack of a better term. You know what I mean? I know that was a not so
Yeah.
elegant way of putting that, but that's exactly what I think this might become, and what is becoming is that a lot of the ammunition that these counselors were wanting to draw from, it's no longer in their holster. So, there's going to be a little bit of, like you said, frustration and animosity there. Animosity might be a little bit of an aggressive word, but I, you tell me, Jacob, I don't see it going that way. I think that this change was made to make the guidebook or the guide a bit more amenable to the city, and I think Mayor Nenshi saw that.
Not only amenable to the city, amenable to the neighborhoods that were saying, we don't necessarily like this. We want to keep our heritage sites. We want to keep our single-family detached homes. We don't want six-story apartments next to regular residential bungalows. With this being more of more of guidelines than policy, I think you're gonna see a lot more amenable local area planning process as well.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I mean, it kind of lends into, the next kind of part of our chat, which is it's fascinating that on one side of the coin, and again, we don't get to see everything, Jacob, of course, but, on one side of the coin, we have something that Calgarians have kind of said, well, whoa, these communities are saying, well, whoa, this is we don't want this prescriptive. Yes, there should be some guidelines, but we'd like there to be some choice, and it seems like they've been heard, But then we look at an issue, or we look at a project like the Green Line, for something that has been asked for by many Calgarians. Again, as Mayor Nenshi has said, especially in the north central side of the part of the city, and it's taken how long, and we're still not there. And I think that it's fascinating to juxtapose these two issues while they are wildly different. One was going to cost, and one is going to cost around $3 billion, and the other was more of a policy. I still think it's fascinating and lends to the conversation of, what goes on behind the scenes. And maybe we do, and I think we both agree with this, is that we do need a little bit more transparency, because for this project to be, for the guidebook or the guide to be looked at and now be, seen as what it should be, which is no, just recommendations, no policy, no bylaws. And maybe, I mean, how long has this bylaw or this guidebook been talked about, Jacob? I mean, what, a year? 3 years, 3 years?
Well, the committee members have been kicking around this plan for 5 years. The city at large has only really been talking about it for 1, but still, it's an awful lot of table time. And
go ahead.
And again, we're looking at something like the Green Line, which has been a fundamental promise and keystone to many counselors' legacies for years now, and we're still talking about it.
And let's, to be fair to a certain degree, before we get it, and I want to ask you a couple questions, generally about the Green Line and its history and kind of your perspective, but it is a big project. $3 billion is a lot of money. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this would be the biggest provincial boost of infrastructure in Calgary's history. Is that correct?
If the province lives up to its agreements, yes. That's one of the big sticking points, is is the province is in and out as to whether it'll help fund the project or not.
Right, right. So before we get really too far, you know us, Jacob, we get real far into it. It's like, oh, okay, maybe we should back up here a little bit and talk a little bit more about this. And that's mostly my fault. Let's be real. But you know, can we start kind of back in 2017? So this project was what looked to be at least funded, if not talked about, and then we had a change in we didn't have a change in mayor, but we had a little bit of a mayoral election. And, from what I read, I think we both looked at the sprawl speaking about this whole, or I had a podcast episode about this whole kind of project. Why do you think, is there some sort of, the first thing I want to ask is, do we see a common line between Bill Smith, former PC president, wanting to put a pause on this project and calling it a boondoggle, and the idea that federally now we seem to have a little bit less support, and the UCP are the ones who are in power? Not to point any fingers or not to politicize this or politic this, more than it needs to be. But do you see a kind of trend there? Is $3 billion, do you think, probably the largest sticking point for, the fiscal conservatives and those who are maybe opposed or wanting to put a pause on this?
Obviously, money is going to be a major factor on a project this large. And
right.
I will admit, if there's any capital project I think we need to maybe go slowly on, especially in the economic times that we're in, it's the Green Line, and that's because it's been dragging on for so long without shovels in the ground, and we're putting other things on pause to keep money in the Green Line pot. However, having used the transit system extensively like I have, I do absolutely understand that there's gaps in Ward 1, unless you're unless you're lucky and live in a neighborhood that's next to one of the Red Line stations. There's an awful lot of transfers involved to getting onto the C-train line. So,
right.
Yes, there's clearly a need. I'd like to see maybe an approach similar to how the red and blue lines were built, where we start with a few stations at a time and slowly build outwards, filling in the gaps with bus rapid transit for the first while.
Right, and it's we've seen those rapid transit systems can be quite effective. I think that if it's done properly, and the reason why I say that is because I've experienced many times, particularly at the Chinook station, where there was a stoppage and the train was either stopped because of an accident or something had happened, and rapid bus was the next option to get you to the next station. And hands up, hats off to Calgary Transit, because it is incredible how well they're able to maneuver those quick changes. However, I guess my question becomes, if money is the question or is the concern, and again, I think in this segment, Jacob, it's going to be another hardball with Jason game, but very similar to our chat with Ms. Brannigan. But the idea being that if money is the concern, I think even money was also the concern when the red and blue lines were built. However, do you believe in the argument that the longer you wait, the more expensive it gets?
I do. I absolutely do. But we haven't even firmly decided on a design. There's still arguments on whether stations should be going underground or not. If you contrast that with, say, the event center, there is a more firm design there, and it's just a matter of getting to a point where we negotiate this little fiscal problem that we've run into, and then the project gets built very quickly. The Green Line still seems to be, whether it should be or not, at some stage of debate.
Right. And so let's pause there for, and go back to that quickly, if you don't mind my asking, Jacob. I mean, what are your thoughts design-wise? Do you see an underground station and an underground system being effective to mitigate some of the crossings potentially, or even some of the congestion that is created by having an above ground station or stations system?
I tend to like building at grade for a couple of reasons. One, the accessibility factor for myself is obviously a bit easier. But for another, there's less chance of inclement weather that causes... If you go underground and say you end up near the water table, as you would downtown, there's a significant flood mitigation cost and risk involved.
Right. So, and that's, I think that is, it's key to look at. I can't help but picture, and tell me if you feel the same way, Jacob, but I can't help but picture a city that's a little bit near and dear to my heart for a number of reasons, but I can't help but picture the metro system in Montreal.
See,
right?
My father grew up in Montreal. He had
amazing,
obviously significant experience with the metro. I have never actually been on the metro myself because the stations, except for one or two, are not accessible. So if you could lend any of... But a lot of that comes to Montreal Metro being one of the older LRT systems in the nation. So,
of course. And there's something to be said about that for sure, right? The city of Montreal is much older than the city of Calgary, for sure. And I but I didn't know that. And thank you for that perspective, because again, unfortunately, and I find too many of us are like this, and I'm a perpetrator of it myself sometimes, and I'm working on it. But we don't look at the perspective. Like, I haven't, not to say that I've taken the metro extensively. I've taken the metro maybe 10 or 15 times in my life. I don't live there, but I don't think of that perspective often enough. Right.
Oh, and
I think of myself, and I'm like, great, there's stairs here, and I can walk downstairs. Where we really all should be thinking, okay, well, how about everybody else, right? Like, is there access for everyone else?
The same with the TTC train in Toronto. Only 4 of the stations are accessible.
That definitely needs to change, and I'm not even gonna. I'm sure both of us are nowhere near versed in those, well enough in those cities to talk about, or to kind of go at them for that, which I know we're not. But that is something that is interesting. And so the first thing I think of with Montreal, like I said, I've taken it 10 or 15 times, is that they do, and maybe this was built in many moons ago, but they do, their system, while they are an island, their system does come close to the wall, right? To the flood. So I wonder if that, and the reason I think of Montreal is because it does add a level of accessibility beyond the construction of Montreal, and I'm sure your dad can talk about that too. But it does add it does remove congestion, and it lessens congestion in for all other traffic traversing through and outside and into Montreal.
I
And
will
so,
say this. If we build underground right and we can get the flood mitigation right, I absolutely agree. We don't need, because if you go where the red and blue lines meet, there's an awful lot of traffic and trains, and when it's busy, it just
yes.
congests right up. So I would be more than happy to have some underground green line stations, and in minus in the heavy minus weather we get in the winter, it might even provide some protection from the elements as well.
And that's what I think of, right? There's something to be said about, you know, potentially less property damage, right? That's the hope, is that it's not outside and therefore it's not subjected to the elements. Now, not to say that it's gotten so cold that the glass is, broken, or the train, the trains have broken down. However, there's a cost mitigation there that helps with flood remediation. And I think, like you said, I think of, for example, an extra lane both ways on Crowchild, right? If we
Absolutely.
could if we can incorporate, the red and blue lines into it, wow. And that's that's a 10, 15-year project.
Yes.
But to incorporate, but nonetheless, there's something to be said about the benefits that would come, and the ability, the accessibility that would come, that would happen to this city, and the way that things that would flow a little bit better, and would be, I think, roads like the Deerfoot and like Stony Trail, while as beautiful and as well built as it is, it would take congestion off of that. But going forward, I wanted to see where you stood on it being above ground and underground. My second question to you is this: is $3 billion enough? I know that
Again,
you're not in construction.
going back to the event center conversation, and I'm sorry to keep jumping back to that, but it's a
No,
lot
they're
of the
they're okay.
same arguments because of the nature of the project, right? Um,
Right, absolutely.
and these big capital projects, we both know the budget is never the budget. Um,
Right, right.
so three billion is where we're gonna start, and it's probably gonna end up being around five would be my guess. Obviously, I don't know. I'm not in the closed door meetings that we shouldn't be having closed door meetings, but I don't see these numbers. However, it this kind of thing also makes the level of federal and provincial participation crucial. And going back to what you were saying earlier, changes in government do affect that, and well, I do identify as strongly as a conservative. Um, the change in government at the provincial level did slow down this project.
Right. And again, there is something to be said, I think, to, going back to how close these two projects are. It's similar in terms of their policy, and the fact that these closed door meetings do not help anyone, right? Um,
No, we had a 2 hour one. We had a 2 hour closed session today, albeit it was slightly different. It had to do with the ethics commissioner, and oh my God, is it shameful that we need an ethics commissioner in municipal politics? But
right.
that one at least I can see. But when it comes to negotiating the money on capital projects, we gotta know what we're signing on to as citizens.
Absolutely, and we have to know where both parties stand from. And again, from their mouths, it's secondhand information is not helpful, right? We all want to be part of the conversation initially, right?
Exactly, and we've been reading all these articles, and they're great, and they're information, but it is still secondhand. It's still based on renderings, like the article we read about the walking path over top of the Green Line station entrance.
Yeah.
That looked very odd to me, but that's still based on a rendering.
Right, right. And so considering yourself to be the potential new council member for Ward 1 or the council representative for Ward 1, do you see this, like, is there something to be said about the need for some sort of expediency in this project?
It really depends on ridership, because if we're going on ridership coming, and this is sort of where I'm seeing the we can go slow right now, because transit ridership is gonna be slow getting back to pre-COVID levels, because more people are gonna be working from home, which means filling this gap to parts of the city that don't have C-train access maybe isn't as important for 4 or 5 years.
Right, right. And so the question becomes, do you, here's how and that's where my brain goes, is after this, and I know that's very difficult to visualize right now. What does after this, when is the real question, but what does after this look like? Let's play a little bit of a game, and let's say that we all get our first and second shots. Excuse me. We're all, I wouldn't go as far as to say immune, but the impact of the variants will have lessened dramatically, and the data will have shown that. In our theory, in our quote unquote imaginary world. Do you not see an immediate jump back to, if not, maybe not more, but do you see almost an immediate jump in terms of usage of service returning back to pre-COVID numbers? Because personally, I do.
I'm interested to see why you think ridership would immediately bounce back, as I don't see it with how work's gonna be, but I'm interested to see what factor you think will make it jump back immediately.
Purely and utterly social. I really think that on the basis of the lack of connection, once there is a common agreement, whether that be through Alberta Health Services, whether that be through the federal health minister, or whether that be through the provincial, whoever, the argument is that we all will want to, my argument is that we will all want to go and reconnect. And in a time where potentially there are a lot of Calgarians and those especially who haven't been working, but those who have been especially affected by COVID, financially speaking, it generally means that if the population is not financially booming,
it's a lot
they will
cheaper
turn to easy
transit than drive.
And that's exactly it. On top of, if we're adding, with a social element, there is bound to be potentially a bigger jump in alcohol consumption and utilizing the bars and the common social spaces throughout the city, and where we hope, as we've all constantly should remind everyone, is that that with no drinking and driving, and potentially come future cannabis consumption, especially once cannabis consumption becomes legal within a business, which it will, I think, coming in the phase 4 of the Cannabis Act. It begs the question of, if connection is where we're all at, and it's something that we're all craving, and if we're all suffering from this economic downturn due to the virus, then wouldn't that create a bigger demand for social services and a larger amount of ridership within, at least from my perspective, within Calgary Transit?
Am
I crazy?
I can see a quick boom for transit, especially in the summer, especially if we get things opened up around, hopefully for Stampede, and then
Right.
that'll obviously be a massive boom, but and then for the rest of the summer, because I think you make some very valid points. I think, however, that that would slow down in the winter again when people are
Right.
mostly just working. However, I could be wrong. Again, I don't
Me
see
too.
the
Me too.
ridership projections, and maybe we do need this project right now. Um, from my perspective, I, I think maybe the ridership boom is a bit of a short thing, and then it tapers off again. Um, yeah, and
Right.
here's another thing to think about. After what we've all been through, do we all consistently want to stand on the metal tube that is the sea train together? Or is that still gonna be a little bit awkward for a while?
Well, and I think it plays to the nuances of, will we as a Western society, like many other societies have done, will we adopt the practice and behavior of continuing to wear a mask should we feel ill and are, in the general public, right? Which we do see in many, many other, parts of the world and other civilizations, not civilizations, in other,
Societies.
societies. Thank you.
I
And that's
and to answer that really quickly, I do see us. I don't see masks fully going away because this had way too much of an impact on the general population. I think we do see a little more of what you see in Europe and Asia, which is when somebody is maybe not feeling so great, you do throw a mask on. Um, and I know some people aren't gonna like hearing that, and they'd like to see those damn hospital blue masks all burn on a pyre at the end of this, but I don't think that's realistic.
Well, and right, and I think that the reason why masks have been quote unquote vilified right now, if that's right, and by certain parts of the population, I should say, I think that there's a good a healthy population of those who agree with masks and wear them as much as they can to protect everyone. Um, I think the big issue right now is and not to say that I disagree with this at all, but the idea that there is an imposition to wear a mask. There is you must in certain areas. And so my hope is that the vilification or the demonization of masks or those who wear them goes away once that mandate doesn't exist. To be clear, the mandate should exist, in my opinion. Like, we
Absolutely.
need to be wearing
And
masks.
again, and I'll put that out there as well. Fully support the mask mandate. That is my position and always has been, and it is the position of all my volunteers as well, in case that was ever unclear. But we're going off on one of our tangents that we sometimes go on. So, to
Absolutely.
get
Going
back
back
to
to going back to yes, yeah. To go back to the issue at hand, which is the green line. My hope and my dream is that we can figure out a way to do this underground. Not to say that that's feasible, but talking about the project at hand, how important? My question to you is how important is a rendering or a really, you know, concrete is a difficult word to use, but a somewhat concrete, a tangible at least, plan for the green line. How important is that right now? Because you made a very, I think, astute comment, when in comparison of the event center, is that the event center at least has a design, right? Like a projected design, and is
or at least
tangible in a
most of one that
right,
most
right.
people understand what's generally gonna be in it.
Right, and so I think the argument becomes, in my opinion, at least that's the question I have for you, is not being able to visualize it part of the problem? And do you think that this issue would be solved quicker should there be a physical rendering of either multiple stations, the whole system, whatever the case is, for the public to see?
I do. I think if we saw a little more, that would be helpful in clarifying where we're going, because for the longest time, the Green Line has been this ethereal kind of thought experiment. Like the first time we talked about doing this episode, your first reaction was, "Oh yes, the famous Green Line." And
Yep.
so, and it's sort of been this nebulous, amorphous thing for so long that I think seeing more tangible, if not progress, what this is gonna look like for sure. Not options, but this is what it is. This is what we're paying for. This is how much the province has pledged. We have the money. This is what the federal government pledged. We have the money. This is what the project's gonna be. Would make this a lot less contentious.
Do you think, as somebody who could potentially be the new representative for Ward 1, is that something that you would try to do as a member of council?
Absolutely, we need to do this. Whether I'm working on the Intergovernmental Affairs Committee or not, this would be something I'm interested in, by the way. I have an affinity for all three levels of government. But whether I'm on intergovernmental affairs or not, whoever is in the next council needs to push the province and Ottawa for a firm commitment like today, preferably without like strings on environmental policy or anything else attached, which has been another one of the kind of sticking points, is that a lot of the infrastructure money, especially federally, tends to come with conditions.
Right.
Right. And just to actually touch on that, since I brought it up, another line on the C train and the completion or completion for now of the system with the Green Line, I will say, is important to the climate goals that the city does have.
Right.
So it's important in that aspect as well.
And I apologize for my ignorance, Jacob. Is there a environmental outlook on this project? Is there an environmental incorporation to the idea? Like, are they trying to make this project somewhat carbon neutral? To your knowledge?
I'm sure they are. Having read the project site like we have, there didn't seem to be any direct documentation about it.
That's what I
But
thought.
with the environment being such a hot topic lately, it would be foolish to think that there wouldn't be some kind of energy efficiency tag put on the building of the stations and things like that.
Awesome. Because obviously that's pretty epically important to have in a project like this.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about tangibility in terms of creating this more tangible plan, which I think will, if done, will impact the public interest in the project, and which I think will in turn help the federal and the provincial governments be a little bit more firm on their contributions. But what do you know of, from talking to your constituents, maybe not super specific to Ward 1, but Ward 1 and beyond, what is the public sentiment right now around Green Line, because I think that in some articles we've seen that, some people have commented that it's a failure. Some people that, have commented that it's so, like you've mentioned before, it's so amorphous and vague and shapeless right now that I don't think about it at all as a Calgarian. Like, is that the kind of sentiment that you're seeing right now?
You're gonna see a lot of opinions. There's gonna be some people that say it's a failure because it should be built already. There's gonna be people that say it's a failure because it shouldn't cost as much as it does. There's gonna be people that basically don't think about it at all because, like I said, they live right next to the red or the blue line, and who cares? And then
Right.
you're gonna see the people that are like, well, it needs to happen, but does it need to happen today? Or, yes, we should be doing this today. I'll take out a shovel and dig a station right now. So there's just such a wide variety of opinion that it's sort of hard to gather it all into a general consensus because there isn't one. I think there's a lot of frustration, but where that frustration comes from is from a lot of different places.
Right. And so, in your purview, what do you think is needed to edge the federal and provincial governments forward, potentially as a future, member of council? What do you see as being needed to help push? Now, again, understand that you get half the information. You're not behind these closed door meetings that I don't think would happen if you were, a member of council. But knowing what you know, being able to draw the inferences that you can draw.
Well, in addition to the tangibility factor we already talked about, I think another big thing is, in order to make this commitment firmly, especially the province would like to see the unemployment number go down, because that would signal to them that a lot more people are gonna be needing these trains.
Right. And so, in your mind, it would be more revolved, the data needed would be more revolved around efficiency of work and productivity and things like that.
Absolutely.
Right. Which you agree, while there are more and more people working at home, that may not necessarily be the case going forward. And even if it is, there is still going to be a healthy amount of the population taking transit.
Office towers will still exist. So if economically we get back on our feet, absolutely we need to fill in the system gaps and make the Green Line happen.
Right. Right now, what do you see as a timeline in the best interest of your plan? So when you go, I would assume that your opinion is still similar, at least, mostly the same, where you do believe that there will be maybe a small boon in usage of transit post-COVID, but not, enough to justify rushing this plan forward. What's your timeline?
I'd like to see by the end of my first term, so 4 years after 2025, I'd like to see the first few stations being built.
Okay, so 5 years from now. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And again, that in your mind gives the economy time to rebuild itself back up, for demand to get back to where it was pre-COVID, if not higher.
Exactly.
And thus justifying the $3 billion versus today rushing that through and to potentially not service anyone. Right. So my question becomes, in 2025, more hardball with Jay, what is the cost going to look like if you had to guesstimate, being that you're not a contractor
I,
nor a
I would
nor,
hope parts of this, at least materials-wise, actually become cheaper as shipping becomes easier. And maybe we deal with some of our trade issues with the USA and Europe. Um, Obviously, inflation is still a thing, though. Um,
right.
so, hopefully, you would only see a modest increase, but hopefully also by the end of my third term, we're not running a, a capital deficit.
Right, right.
In which case it makes paying these sums of money less onerous on taxpayers and easier in general to do.
Well, then on a broader, scale, to give your listeners, potentially those who are just listening to this episode for the first time, on a broader issue and keeping the green line in mind, what do you think needs to happen, and what would you push forward to happen should you become a member of council, for you to not be in a red ink situation?
In order to make these capital projects easier to build and realize, we have to get on our feet financially, and that means not only liquidating some reserve funds and cutting some staffing costs at the city, but it also means fighting urban sprawl, which makes services more expensive to upkeep, like the fire department and police and EMS and gas and everything.
Right.
So if we could densify somewhat, getting back to the guidebook, in line with what communities want to do, we absolutely do need to do this, because if we keep growing out and out and out, it becomes much more expensive, one, to live here for homeowners, and two, it becomes much more expensive to run city services without raising your taxes, and nobody wants to pay more taxes.
Absolutely. That's yeah. I think that everybody can agree with you there, buddy. And so good, and that's exactly what I was wondering about was what we need to do, and we've talked about it many times, and I think our the listeners would like to know, and yeah, I think that we need you in City Hall, buddy.
Oh, well, I
That's what I think.
appreciate that very, very much. So, to get on a few smaller items, because of the COVID restrictions being tightened by the province, we had to cancel the food drive I've teased on here a few times, or at least postpone it to a time when we can safely and in good conscience get out into these neighborhoods and these grocery stores and help some of these people in need. So look out for that. Hopefully we don't have to wait too long. As well, if you follow me on social media, you'll know this, but me and my team have had to suspend canvassing activities, because for a couple of weeks, or for about a week and a half, we were starting to door knock and come to the constituents, come to you and get your opinion on what we can be doing better, and seeing if we can count on some support. And it's been absolutely amazing to see the level of optimism and the appetite for change in the couple hundred doors we've been to before we had to suspend. So I look forward to seeing all of you at your doors again sometime soon when we all get our shots. And that brings
Absolutely.
me to my last small item. Our co-host here is now scheduled to get his vaccine, and that is because everybody 12 and up is vaccine eligible. So book your appointments, guys, and let's get back to normal as soon as we can. Jason, would
Absolutely.
you like to add anything?
Yeah, let's put another meaning to the song Shots. Shots, 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 shots. That's what I want this summer. Is just
Yes.
everyone to get their shots. And just play that song if you're scared. That's what I'm going to do because I don't like needles. I'm not scared of the vaccine, but I don't like needles. And
Oh,
so
I hate them too.
yeah, to get me a little bit psyched up, I'm just on the way there. I'm just going to put on some shots, 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 shots.
Love it,
It's gonna
buddy.
be great.
Any comments on the postponement of the food drive or having to stop canvassing or anything?
On both those notes, I'm so sad to see it, but I think we're doing the right thing, for the community. And I think that, it's a postponement for a reason. We'll be back at it. You and I will be back at it. I'll be meeting some of you, in your neck of the woods, which is always fun. I get to discover a little bit more of Calgary as much as I was born and raised here. I can always learn more. And yeah, man, I'm just excited to help and to get everybody on board with getting you onto council and to making some real change and doing what the current council, continuously tries to do at least and tries their best, which is, to make Calgary the best Calgary it can be, right? And that's what we all want. That's what I think the current, members of council want. But I think that it's time to see some different perspectives. And I think that it's time for a different approach, personally. Is my opinion, and I do. That's why I'm talking with you right now, buddy.
Thank you so much, Jace. As usual, and you can join in calling for this too, but we want to hear from you. So again,
yes,
send us any topics or questions at my social media, Jacob for Ward 1. You can also email me the questions at jacobforward1.ca. Please, we want to hear from you. We got lots of shows lined up, but if you guys want to talk about something, that's why episodes like this happen. They pop up organically, and then we have something more and interesting to talk about.
absolutely. And again, our word is never the final word, right? Everybody has, a perspective and an opinion, and we welcome that. We want to hear from every walk of life, from every perspective, because we get it, right? We all have a different way of seeing things. So we'd love to hear from everyone, no matter what your position might be.
Absolutely. So that brings us to the end of another episode. We're hopefully gonna have guests on very soon. If not, we have an episode lined up to talk about what the role of your counselor actually should be, whether you elect them to represent you or elect them as a decision maker themselves. And that's a very interesting conversation, so I'm looking forward to having it. We'll have some more guests from the election, and we'll let you know what's going on in your neck of the woods. We'll see you next week.